Right, welcome to All About Animals Radio. Today we're going to be talking about horse racing kills. And that means the slaughter industry, which is something that is avoided by mainstream racing. So welcome Kristin Leigh, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. It's brilliant that we can talk.
Yes, thank you so much for having myself on behalf of Coalition for the Protection of Racehorses on the show.
Thank you ever so much. Right, horses now. Everybody loves horses. I mean, they're beautiful to look at, they're kind, you know, they're thrilling to watch. And when we see immaculately turned out horses gleaming and being led about, and you know, everybody professing love for these horses, everything looks absolutely lovely. It's a fun day out. We see the horses galloping, which, you know, horses love to bomb around a field. But that's not the real story, is it? To get that horse born, bred to the race course, and then what happens next? That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our research over the last 15 years has made it abundantly clear that the suffering of a horse begins at birth, and if not given a lovely home after being raced, can continue to their death. So their entire life as a racehorse, officially as a racehorse, is one of suffering, and then often once they're retired as well, if they survive the knackery or the slaughterhouse.
Now, I've read from your stats that 16,000 foals are slaughtered. Is that per year?
It has reduced, and that's only because breeding has reduced. So when we first started campaigning, it was actually 18,000 in 2008. Foals were being born into the industry, but the industry wasn't growing in size. So you would say that about the same amount are exiting racing each year, but there was absolutely no recording or accountability of where those horses were going. And through our investigations, even back then, every time we went to a knackery, there would be a majority of horses from the track there, some that had raced even the week before. And as we've been exposing the topic of wastage, which back then no one even knew what wastage was, and now it's kind of a regular household name. Everyone pretty much knows in horse racing there is such a thing as wastage, and that's through, you know, groups like us exposing what that means, and getting it out in the media and getting the media talking about it. And it's common knowledge now, thankfully, that people are aware that the majority of racehorses will be sent to the knackery or the slaughterhouse once they've been used in racing and they're no longer wanted. And that can be obviously due to injuries sustained on racing, or simply just for not being fast enough and therefore not returning money on the so-called investment that people have made on their life. But that figure now, as far as breeding goes, has reduced to about 13,500 foals a year. So as you've seen a reduction in breeding, we've of course seen a reduction in the number of horses entering and then exiting racing each year. But the same thing happens in the sense that the industry isn't growing in size. So if you count the numbers coming in and the number of horses racing and the number going out, the number of horses in racing, is actually getting smaller, which means there's more horses exiting racing than there's actually entering. So if you've got 13,500 foals coming in each year, you've got 13,500 plus horses exiting each year. Now the industry will say they're all rehomed, or they go into equestrian pursuits, or they go into breeding. The reality is the breeding industry, or the breeding number of mares and stallions, isn't growing either. So there's got to be that many people exiting breeding each year too. So they're not accounting for those mares as well that are coming out of breeding. So through our investigations and research at knackeries and slaughterhouses more recently, our estimate is now that about approximately 10,000 horses are now being killed each year in Australia alone, racehorses. That's from flat racing only, flat and jumps racing. That's not the trots, so not harness racing. That's a whole other wastage issue in itself.
Right, so that is over 1,000. Well, basically you can count on 1,000 horses a month. And Australia does have slaughterhouses just for horses, don't they?
We have knackeries just for horses, or knackeries that will predominantly do horses. We do have did have a slaughterhouse that was the only registered and approved slaughterhouse in the country to send horses, because we don't have a pallet in this country for horse meat, but obviously other countries do. So we do have one approved slaughterhouse in the country that is licensed to export the flesh of the horses overseas to countries like Japan and Russia, and Eastern Europe for food, for the dinner plate. But we're very happy to report that just recently that slaughterhouse has stopped actually killing horses. So currently, as far as we're aware, there's no slaughterhouse in Australia that is registered to send the meat of horses overseas for human consumption. However, that slaughterhouse was also killing cows and camels, and potentially other animals too. So they were not really set up, which was one of the huge issues with, I mean, we obviously don't approve of the slaughter of any animals, including horses at all, but this particular slaughterhouse was set up for cows, not horses. So we exposed them in 2019. There was a huge story that came out that the ABC 7:30 report covered that showed the standards at that slaughterhouse and how it was impossible to kill these horses in a so-called humane way, because it wasn't designed for horses, it was designed for cattle. So thankfully that place is now closed down. So, but obviously they're still going somewhere. So they're going to the other knackeries. We estimate there's about 30 knackeries across Australia that are killing horses, but they're for being predominantly killed for pet food, or almost entirely for pet food now.
So that is a significant number of horses that are going in there. And also, I just want to sort of remind people that horses have passports, and horses in the UK travel to Australia. I know it sounds silly that, you think, well, how can they make any money? But, dogs go from Ireland to China. If there's, as you say, if there's a pallet for it, they go. And if there's a way of slaughtering an animal, sadly, rather than just put these horses to sleep humanely in a field, for some reason, the racing industry seems to prefer to send them somewhere where they can be slaughtered. And that's something that, as someone who has horses and pets, I find hard to fathom why, these horses are going all over the world for slaughter, and, all the foals being bred and everything else. I mean, sadly, racehorses, thoroughbreds, aren't the most desirable riding horses. They never have been. Most people want a safe, happy hacker, or, a horse for riding club events and stuff. And generally thoroughbreds are quite big, and, they're quite slim, and they're not everybody's cup of tea when it comes to, even though I think they're wonderful. I had a thoroughbred myself for 30 years. And he was the most kind, gentle soul on the planet, and he was wonderful. But they're not everybody's cup of tea at all. So the sort of where all these thousands and thousands of horses are, all these foals, they're clearly not in people's fields. They're just not. You'd see them advertised all over the place, and they're not. So it's really, really important for people to really, consider, where are all these foals going? If one person's telling you, if the racing industry is telling you, or they're going to home, say, okay, well, where are they, please?
Exactly.
And you've got actual stats. You've done the hard work. I don't see stable staff who love these racehorses in slaughterhouses leading those horses in. I see them loaded on a truck from the track, or pulled out of a lovely stable straight onto a slaughter truck, and then it's bye loved dobbin, or whatever they're called. And that's the hard thing. And I know it's really easy when you go for a day at the races just to get, you have your drink and you have everything else, and you watch the horses, and it's all, it's almost you're running on adrenaline yourself at the racetrack, and that's what they try and do. But when you watch those horses' faces, especially, I love seeing the close-ups of the horses' faces when the racing posts and that all all the newspapers and the news, they show this horse being pushed over the line, and you look at their face and their eyes are bulging, their tongues are probably hanging out, They couldn't look more distressed if they tried. And you think
Mm.
they're 1, 2, 3 years old in racing, you know, for the flat, maybe 4, and they're both. Then you know by all science that their spines are not properly developed until they're 6 years old.
Mm.
You know, and that's all that you're asking, isn't it? Is, you know, come on, let's start thinking. Really, it's like racing's done themselves in, isn't it? You raised a really interesting point on your website that until 40 years ago, horses were not considered for racing until at least 3 years old. You know, where did you kind of find that information?
We've just done lots of research on lots of studies over the years that have documented this. And the interesting thing about, I mean, the ultimate reason why they've changed that from 3 years old, sorry, to 2 years old now is to get us a faster return on investment. It has nothing to do with anything else, but the industry, because there has been people, even in the industry, speaking up. I mean, you have one of our biggest trainers in the country who's in, you know, the Racing Hall of Fame, Gay Waterhouse, even state publicly that 2-year-old race horses here today, gone tomorrow. I mean, that's a statement she herself made. And, you know, they've brought, because of this sort of criticism, but it won't stop her doing it either, mind you, but because of this criticism that the industry has received, there was a study that came out in 2012 that tried to defend this practice, saying that if you get a horse exercising younger, they're going to develop a thicker bone mass and they're going to be more prepared for racing. But there was a lot of issues with that study that we have highlighted on our website as well, where we talk about the change from 3-year-old racing to 2-year-old racing at a minimum. And that is one that there's no transparency as to who funded the study whatsoever, which is always a big, you know, a big alarm bells, has big alarm bells ringing. But on top of that, the study doesn't talk about the intensity of the training and the racing. So it may well be good to get a horse moving about and exercising younger if you're going to try to prepare them for the racing industry as an older horse. But we're talking excessive, pushing them beyond their limits on the racetrack, beating them with a whip, with a jockey on their back, when, like you said, their spine isn't even fused properly until 6 years old, and they're being beaten. Their knees only fuse, my understanding is, at the age of about 2. So you've got these horses already in training at the age of 1, getting ready for and pushing them on track work and in training regimes to their absolute limits, so that by the age of 2, they can get them on the track and get them earning money. I mean, this is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, 3 is even very, I mean, any age, as you know, we would say you shouldn't be doing that to a horse, but particularly when their bodies aren't skeletally mature until the age of 6, it's absolutely ridiculous. And that's what we believe also contributes to the wastage issue, the high wastage of horses, because they're injured. And like you said, you know, if you've got a lame horse, it's very dangerous to then retire them from racing and then put children on their backs and things like that, when they've got these injuries and they're suffering and they're going to throw people off their backs because they're in pain, you know, or they're tormented and therefore they're aggressive. All sorts of things can be happening with horses that are coming out of the industry, which is a whole other conversation with clear traceability and passports and information that we just don't have here in Australia at all. It's terrible. We don't even have a proper system that traces these horses, which we can go into too. But I mean, this study that everyone now in the industry themselves refers to is completely flawed. It's not a proper study on the impacts that are really happening from hard, excessive training, which is what these horses are going through. And we also found with that study, it actually, I've got a quote here from that study, which completely contradicts itself. It states, "It is critical to be aware that even though appropriate exercise has been shown to be necessary for optimal development, horses may be more easily injured during this time if the exercise is excessive." So they've kind of contradicted themselves in their own study. They've also stated there is also evidence that fractures occur more often in younger horses and continue to decrease in frequency as age increases. So again, they're contradicting themselves. And then just the final thing on that study is that they only they used a 10-year study of horses actually in racing. They didn't use any figures from the horses that don't make it to the track. So all those horses that are put into training and never make it to the racetrack due to injury or just not being suitable. So our estimates and the industry figures actually show themselves that approximately 1/3, it's actually even more than that, but we like to be conservative with figures. 1/3 of horses that are born into racing do not make it to the racetrack. None of those horses were included in this study. So the results in this study are flawed simply from that as well, because it's leaving out an entire portion of horses that may have been injured due to being raced or trained, as a 2-year-old, as 2 or younger. So the study is flawed completely in our view, and that's all over our website. If anyone ever wants to argue that point when it's raised with the industry, it's all there for people to look at.
There's a lot of information on your website, and we'll come to that at the end. When they talk about that study, I would raise the point that naturally, and this has been seen by many great horse people over the years, and it's always a thing that it's lovely if you can, if you've got the right kind of horse. Now, not all horses want to be ridden, not all horses want to be with people. I've seen that from experience. There are those that do love a job, definitely, and they are very people orientated and far more domesticated. Now, one of my horses did come off a herd that they graze mountains, and it's well known that they've got all the herbs, they've got all the foliage. The boys are in one herd, the girls are in another herd, and they can roam, and to watch them is beautiful. They play, they make heart stop as they go up and down the mountains at speed. But the difference is it's on their terms. It's like watching children, your own children. As a parent, your heart stops when they climb a tree too high, or they run and jump, I don't know, off a bank, or anything like that. Now, we all encourage our children to do sports. We encourage play with our pets. If you've got a puppy, you follow the 10-minute rules, don't you, and all that kind of thing. And that is how we all build bone mass and everything else. And that is basically accepted science, and we know that. Now, if you've got a foal, I watched one here last night, funny enough, playing. It's only a few days old, and me and my children stopped and watched because he was just bombing around, and he was so sprightly, and he's beautiful, his long little legs and everything else. And I was surprised at how nippy he was. He could really turn. However, he was practicing. He was practicing with what he could do. He was exploring up and down some little banks, and then he stopped and literally flopped down in the dust in front of his mum. It was lovely. That's what these racing foals can't do. It's not on nature's terms. It's not on their terms. And the thing is about having horses, and they do know this, is that the bigger the frame, the longer they take to develop. They absolutely do. Mentally, I always find horses are obliging far more than ponies. That those typical pony minds where they will, they're lovely, and they want to help and they want to be with you, but there is that cheekiness, and that it's going to be more on my terms. But horses are so kind and so generous that they will break themselves for you. And that I find so terribly sad, that we do that. And how many times do you have to go to a race course and see a horse with a broken leg and a bone sticking out, and it's oh well, that's sad, on to the next race is going to be delayed for 10 minutes. And that's another point, that racing is often delayed. I've been to enough race courses, and so is everybody else really, whether you're pro or against, and we know that races get delayed for accidents, for loose horses, saddle slips, shoes thrown. And in the UK, I don't know if you saw it, Animal Rising was blamed for, I think, the National. There was a horse died in it, and some trainers said, oh, you got the horses all wound up by delaying 10 minutes. Well, several times the National has had false starts. Many times it's had false starts. Horses been sent off, come back, sent off, come back, and you're almost screaming at the telly, will you please let those horses go? So this is the thing. I know pro caps will always want to see the horses race, whatever, but there is a good middle amount of people like me, I used to love the races, that which are saying, can we have some care? These are such kind, gentle animals, and beautiful animals, and clever. They're super intelligent. you know, can you just look at the stats, isn't it? And that's what I do admire organisations such as yourself, because you do the hard work. You know, you're watching some awful scenes and you're getting the stats. And what more can you do but put stats in front of people and say, look, this is happening. You know, when you have all this information, what do you do with it? You know, how do you try and get it out there?
Yeah, well, yeah, good question. I mean, we've got all this fantastic information, and I guess the way we try to get it out there mostly is when the industry is the general public is focused on racing, which is our spring racing carnival, kind of like in England with the Grand National. We, you know, when it feels like the whole country is stopping to watch that horrific race. So those activists have taken fantastic advantage of that by kicking off their horse racing campaign there with that. And obviously Animal Aid's been doing that over in the UK for a long time as well, raising awareness and doing billboards on buses and all sorts of things, protesting at the track. So we do a similar thing here where we work throughout the year on education and campaigning and investigating and researching, but ultimately our more sort of on the street actions occur through the Spring Racing Carnival, because that's when the media are interested in what we have to say. That's when the public is talking about horse racing. That's when people who don't even care about horse racing are gambling on it because they have office sweeps and workplace parties, and it's a public holiday across most of Victoria. So people get a day off for a horse race, which is absolutely disgraceful. So it's an actual public holiday. There are other parts in the country that have their own sort of local public holidays for what they call their Cup Day. So we've got the Melbourne Cup, which is one of the biggest horse races in the world. So and that's what takes place as part of the Spring Racing Carnival. So we really use that event to draw attention to it through protests, through stunts that we'll pull at the racetrack or outside the racetrack, sometimes inside, sometimes outside, and really try to draw attention to it. If a horse dies in the Melbourne Cup, which is more often than not, we will obviously, the media will be really interested to talk about that at that time. But what we always say at that time is, this is not a Melbourne Cup phenomenon. This happens on Australian racetracks every 2.5 days. But you only want to talk about it during the Melbourne Cup because it's the only time of year that the media is talking in general, the mainstream media, not just the sports media, but the general entertainment pages, the fashion pages. That's when you're all talking about it. So that's when we use our opportunity to really draw attention to it. But obviously throughout the year, we're campaigning as well. The jumps racing season, we are the only state in Australia that continues jumps races, which is forcing horses at high speeds over jumps with a jockey on their back whilst they're being beaten with a whip. The fatality rate in jumps races is statistically 19 times more fatal, so for injuries and deaths. So we will use that horrific so-called sport to highlight the horrors of jumps racing and racing in general, to show that these people don't care about horses. If they did, they would not be forcing them over jumps at high speeds, knowing there's a really high chance they're going to be injured and potentially killed. So we go pretty hard during the jump season, filming. We have people at the tracks showing these horses falling and being killed and these horrific injuries that they suffer. So, you know, when you talk about pushing these, you know, us thinking about horses running and galloping and how they like that, I mean, that's the horror about this industry too, is they take advantage of a horse's natural, playful, and sometimes flight instincts, you know, or often flight instincts. They take advantage of their natural position of being and convince the public that they enjoy racing through highlighting, you know, as you're a kid, like you said, you see a horse running and you think, oh, horses love to run. We still see grown adults tell us this, people that are in the industry, horses love to run. And you're like, yeah, on their own terms, not being pushed beyond their limits, not when their spirits are broken, not with a chunk of metal in their mouth that's causing them pain and distress, not with a tongue tied around their tongue to their jaw, and not with a jockey on their back with a whip and spurs. And as we've seen, electric shock devices as well, which are thankfully illegal, but still get used. So, you know, this is not about a horse enjoying a run. This is about a horse being forced to run way beyond their limits, That's why they use the whip at the last 100 metres of the race. It's because the horse is tiring, the horse is exhausted. They want to push them that bit further to get them across the finish line first. They do not care about the well-being of these horses, and if they did, they certainly wouldn't use them in this industry.
One thing I'd like to add, as someone that's sort of, had ridden horses, for a long time now, when you ride a horse, you hope it's a partnership, and you hope, if my horse likes to, if he sees me, he runs in. He certainly doesn't run away if I show that, bring a saddle out. He's like, where are we going, mum? And the difference is when you ride a horse as a leisure horse, and I want to raise this point because the industry and many people love to say, oh, they'll be after our riding horses next. They'll be after our pets. And it's just, you just think, well, okay, I don't eat dogs, but if I stop people killing dogs, does that mean I can't keep a dog? It's the same lunacy quite often, isn't it, really? The same silly argument. So I rode my thoroughbred in just local racing. And when I was at the start, everybody else, they had a few ex-race horses there. They were like you would hear on a normal race course. They were jeering them up, little hits with a stick and all that kind of stuff. And I just stayed quiet. It was a little bit of smugness on my part because my horse was Group 1 bred and he loved to run. He absolutely loved to run. And if he could win, he would win anyway. And quite often he just bowled along and then he just went through the others like they were nothing. And that was wonderful. However, I was the only one doing it that wasn't whipping my horse. And my horse could pull up at any time. It wasn't about that. He loved it. Now that's the difference. I had that odd horse, and maybe there's more like that, but that is not the majority. The amount of people I know that have had ex-racers, and the thing's always the same, they didn't want to run. They didn't want to run. And there are some good trainers in the UK. And I remember a little while ago on Facebook seeing one of them who has a particularly good rehoming saying, oh, my daughter's just done some schooling, so this 3-4-year-old is up for a new home and all that. And they do it very nicely. And then a few of the obviously the trainers' fans were saying, oh no, he looks so good, he likes to run. And the trainer just said, no, he doesn't like to run. And that was refreshing and rare. And this was a very old trainer who maybe was around at the time when you say that they didn't push horses like they do now. And that was good. And that's the point with horses. If no one can, if they can't pull up, if they can't say, I'm not feeling right today, there's loads of people I know that go into events or shows and they were often on their, think, oh, I don't know, Barney wasn't up for it today. Never mind, he still got his carrots. That doesn't happen in racing. As you say, I mean, I can't think of anything worse than putting an electric shock on a horse because one, it's just going to scare them. And there's very famous horse whisperers and trainers out there who even have racehorses themselves who have said, it doesn't work. You almost lose energy. And it's like a sprinter. It's like if you watch human athletes, at European Championships or something, and they're on the sprint block. Well, if you put electric shock up their backside, whereas they're about to run, well, one, they're going to stumble at the start generally, and two, that is going to not do anything for their speed, is it? So you've got some real trolls of, it's almost they just want the brutality into it, isn't it? And that is unreasonable. And that is really sad on the racing part because they don't need to do that. They absolutely don't need to. It's almost like they feel they need to put some bright lights and sparkles on, to make people go, yeah, like, oh, we're still going to do it. It's like they don't think that they can still have any sport if they just dial it down. They've gone over the top, really, haven't they, with it all?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think they seem to think that the public enjoys it more if they can see the horse getting beaten with the whip. But they've done studies and questionnaires and things on the public to say, would you still, the people who are into horse racing, would you still support racing if the whip was banned? And they say yes. So they've got all the data there that shows that they can do this, and pretty much every state in Australia actually wants to see a ban on the whip. But New South Wales is very pro whip, and it's all a bit political, but they're basically preventing a ban on the whip in this country because the leaders in New South Wales refuse to support the ban, and they have a majority say across Australia. So now the states are looking at going independent and going rogue and banning it themselves, and keeping New South Wales as the only state that does allow whip because they just can't get New South Wales over the line. So the industry does actually want to make reform, and I know for a fact it's not because they care about the horses, and a lot of them won't even acknowledge that the whip hurts the horse or that pushes them beyond their limits. They're saying it's better for the sport, so-called sport, in the sense that the public are turning off racing because they cannot believe in 2023 we are still watching and cheering horses being beaten. And they might be able to save this industry into the future if they actually do get rid of the whip. I mean, obviously we're not here to protect the industry, but we support welfare reforms along the way. We want to see an end to horse racing. We can't see that it can be made kind for those horses when you're using animals for entertainment and gambling profits. They're always going to suffer. People are always going to put money first. I'm not saying everyone does that, but a lot of people do. They see the horse as an investment. They're expensive to keep. They want a return on their investment, and so they're going to push them to try to get a return. When they don't get a return on the investment, they get rid of them. A lot of people might not even know where they're going, and they don't want to know. You've got syndicates are getting bigger and bigger. So you've got people, investing as little as $1,000 in a horse, and they've got 20 owners or 30 owners or all these people. There's no limits. So any Tom, Dick or Harry can now be an owner of a racehorse and afford to be if they're reasonably, well off. You don't have to be rich. If you're even comfortable, you can invest in a racehorse now. And the horse can run, and your friends can go to the track, you can celebrate if they win, or you can just enjoy their day out. And then suddenly when the horse is injured or isn't, the trainer tells the syndicate, look, the horse isn't doing well anymore, we're going to retire them. And they'll go, okay, no worries. They don't know where the horse goes. A lot of them have never even met the horse. So they don't have a kind of emotional attachment anymore. They're just seen as a dollar figure on a piece of paper that the trainer reports to. And they used to tell their friends that they're, how great they are because they've got an ownership in a horse. So there's this real detachment now, even more so because you've got owners not even knowing who the horse is. They know nothing about them. They don't know their personality. So there's no emotional connection at all. And therefore, when the horse vanishes, the trainer can even say, oh, yeah, we've taken them off to this property. And they'll go, oh, okay, great, next. And, they might not even know that the horse has been sent to the knackery, or they don't care.
Do we know how many racehorses are bred each year in Australia?
13,500 for the flats and jumps. And then there's also the trots too, which is a lesser number, but we focus on the flat and the jumps, and that's 13,500.
Sorry, if I go back to the foals, I thought 13,000 foals were slaughtered per year. I mean, the whole breeding.
That's how many are bred.
Right.
So we estimate about 10,000 of those approximately are slaughtered.
Okay. Yeah. So they really do use a small proportion of them, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because our 2-year investigation into the Merrimah slaughterhouse alone found that 4,000 thoroughbreds and 1,000 standardbreds are being killed at that one slaughterhouse alone each year. That's now the one that's just closed down. So that's just say 4,000 at one slaughterhouse alone, and that's in Queensland. So there's another 30 knackeries across the country that always have racehorses at them. So our estimates are approximately 10,000. It's impossible to know exactly, but the industry, the problem is as well, is the industry will send a form as soon as a horse is retired. Now that you've got 7 days now because of our work exposing them, they're trying to crack down. You've got 7 days now to inform the industry that you've so-called retired your horse, or that they've passed on, or whatever might have happened to them. There's a tick box, and you can basically, they ask you, where's that horse gone, or what's happened to them? They've actually removed the option from that form since we've started exposing them of abattoir or slaughterhouse. They've taken it off. So even if you wanted to tell them that's what's happened to the horse, you actually can't. It's not even statistically available as an option. So they've got things like equestrian pursuit, rehomed, they have the owner or trainer has to put the address of where that horse has been rehomed to. So what the industry does now is they pull all these stats off those forms. They say this percentage has been gone to this equestrian pursuit, this many have been retired to a lovely home somewhere, but they don't provide any proof or any evidence. So you can't find out if that's true. Now, the reality is there is just not enough homes in Australia for all of these horses. If you think about 13,000 coming in, therefore 13,000 coming out each year, in 2 years, that's 26,000. In 3 years, that's 39,000. Where are all these horses going? I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous to think that we can provide homes for all these horses when you think about that every single year happening. So basically, they say they audit these forms and they do random checks. We totally question that because they never provide evidence to those audits. And they are trying to claim, as they were back then before all of our investigations, that less than 1% go to slaughter. That's still too many, of course, but it's an absolute fabrication, and it's based on a form that doesn't allow you to tell the truth, even if you wanted to.
That's shocking. That is really shocking.
Yeah.
You know, and then they got the nerve to say how much they love the horses. I mean, that is just diabolical, isn't it? I'm astounded, really, that so many people still have this dream of working with racehorses and how, you know, loving them into the stables and out, because it's not a loving industry, is it? You know, quite often when I see on the racehorse rehoming page, it's I looked after such and such when they were racing at whatever yard, and you know, it's nice to see them there, or, you know, if one or two have been saved. But I don't say it because, you know, there's no point starting an argument on that front, but I do say, well, did you not think while you were loving that horse for 5 minutes that, you know, there is probably less than a 90% chance than a 10% chance of that horse actually living a life and having a home, because of the stats don't lie, do they? Facts don't lie. You know, these slaughterhouses have got these horses from somewhere, and we're not, as you say, you know, where I live, where you live, in America and Canada, anywhere you go, the only places a majority of horses, sadly, are in slaughterhouses. You know, you can see some in fields and stuff, but there's not tens of thousands of them, you know, and that's the thing. And it's a little bit sad that when people go to the races, you know, there should almost be a sign up saying, you know, when you walk through this gate, you know, do you want to put a number on a board? How many can die for you to still enjoy your drink? You know, why, you know, but here you go, you can bet on the football, the rugby, the athletics, the, I don't know, swimming, or any other sport, which is voluntary. And that's a little bit odd about betting, isn't it? Because if you watch a football match, you know, both teams want to win, don't they? You know, the players are going for it, their bonuses, everything depends upon their goals and, you know, their win bonuses, or whatever else. You know, they're going for it. They've put themselves in tip-top condition as best they can. And, you know, you can bet on some footballer, until I know nothing about football, can't you? But, you know, kicking a ball in the right net at the right time, you know, and you get better odds, or that kind of thing. If you've got all that going on, why do you want to risk a horse's life? And maybe it's just that the light bulb hasn't gone off yet. That, you know, no one's trying to stop you having a gamble or having a day out. You know, you go and support the people, you know, doing their stuff. And maybe it is still the generation, like I was, that we got taken by our parents. It's still considered a day out. You know, kids can run about and you can have a drink in a nice setting. The race course looks nice, like a golf course. You know, it's just breaking that cycle, isn't it? That almost hereditary cycle of, you know, doing other stuff now. But if you want to gamble, you know, not that it's a great idea, you know, to waste your money on that, but if you're spending £1 or £2 on day out, you know, go to the football, go to the rugby, you know, support real sports that help kids and help everything, really, that people enjoy. You know, there's no victims.
Well, that's what a big focus of our, when I said we do a lot of our focus on the Spring Racing Carnival, we run the Nut to the Cup campaign, which hopefully you've heard of, which is basically encouraging people that you can have a really good time without going to the races. So highlighting that the racing industry uses fashion, drinks, socializing, people meeting each other, you know, all this kind of thing. They associate that, they market that for horse racing because they know the younger generations particularly are going to turn away from this, and they are starting to turn away from this. And, you know, various questionnaires are showing that now as well that go around, that people just want to say up to the cup now. So they're trying their hardest to keep them in, to keep them going, to show that it's, you know, that it's this amazing fun day out, get dressed up. And that's why they have all these side shows. They've even got like rides for the kids now to get parents to bring their kids to indoctrinate them into thinking that this is okay and that it's fun and it's normal when it's not. So Nut to the Cup is really about showing, no, you can have a great time without engaging in animal abuse. You can still get together, you can still have drinks, you can still dress up. We have human races at our Nut to the Cup party each year where humans do all different sorts of fun races. We have dress ups, all sorts of things. We get, instead of people having an office sweep, corporates are actually calling us now and saying, what do we do? It's really awkward because it's, you know, it's social, there's no social license in horse racing anymore. Some of the people in our office still want to have a sweep. A lot of people are upset if we do, what should we do? And they ask us advice. So there's this real, you know, change in workplace you know, workplace requirements to sort of be more inclusive of everyone and not bullying anyone into doing anything they don't want to do. So a lot of people are having Nut to the Cup at the workplace, and we give them, you know, tools on how to do that. We can send them posters. We send them cruelty-free recipes to, you know, to have on the day, and human games that they can play instead. So there's a real shift happening, and the racing industry can see it, and they're throwing everything at getting the younger generation to the track. And sadly, getting them into problem gambling. I mean, they're pushing gambling every time it's in Spring Carnival here. It's the amount of complaints we get. It's not us running them, but people saying, oh my God, have you seen how many gambling ads have been on the TV and on the radio and all over the city on billboards? Because they're just pushing gambling on everyone, and that includes young people, vulnerable people. I mean, it's not healthy in any which way you look at it. It's a terrible industry for the horses and for humans. There's an amazing amount of workplace harassment that goes on in racing that's finally getting spoken about as well, from stable hands and the people that are lower down in the work chain in the racing industry that work ridiculous hours for shocking pay, you know, from all hours of the morning till night. They've got night races now, so even, you know, it's just exhausting people and burning them out. So the conditions for everyone are bad. So I think that will only lead to more people speaking up, which is what we're seeing people in the industry feeling really jaded and starting to come forward more, which is fantastic. And we encourage more of that because we need insiders to speak up to learn about what's going on. There's only so much we can do from the outside. So very much encourage that, and need to break through that messaging that this is a sport. I mean, it's an industry, it's an exploitative industry that the horses do not choose for themselves.
Can I sort of raise one point as well, that in this heat, you know, obviously, you know, we're really weak here, you know, 30 degrees and we're all, you know, panicking and, you know, freezing our hot water bottles. But I wouldn't take my horse out in 30-degree heat. I wouldn't. And I remember watching a program on Australian racing on one of the big studs, and they were up at 4 o'clock in the morning to exercise their horses, and they had this machine thing that you could tie your horses to, and off they went. But the races are not at 4 o'clock in the morning. You know, you're asking young horses, athletes, to run in extreme conditions. And with the climate, as we know, climate crisis everywhere. IPC report was out, or it was all over the media again this week, all kinds of problems going on around the world. You know, Canada's half on fire, isn't it? You know, things are not going to get better. If we want to protect our pets and keep our leisure horses, then you have to consider the whole situation. You've got to consider all the food and everything else, and how all these animals are going to stay safe. You know, Australia certainly had its problems with wildfires. Nobody will ever forget that. You've got to think, if you've got 10,000 horses in one industry, or 13,000, it's like having a farm, isn't it, with 10,000 cows. You've got to be able to move them, and you've got to be able to keep them safe, and you've got to be able to feed them. The numbers globally on animals are too big, for wildlife, which is what we need to keep the world happy, healthy and happy anyway. All this overbreeding has a knock-on effect. So my appeal to these industries would think, you've had your day, can you stop being so selfish, dial it down, and also in this cost of living crisis, as you say, with so many problems with drugs, addiction, homelessness, all the racing subsidies. I mean, how anybody can even have a reason to give subsidies to an industry when there are so many people in need right now. There's a whole load of social issues now, and maybe for the first time with perhaps people happily talking about animal issues, I think more so now, that the dots are joining. People are realizing that what's important. And I don't know where you are, but here we see probably more people out on bicycles now than I've ever seen before, since COVID, I suppose. But more people, their holidays are hiking with the kids and wanting outside space. There is a change in what people are already doing, and it is maybe the cost of living crisis, although it doesn't mean camping's particularly cheap sometimes, depending where you go. But it's about days out. And when I took my kids to the races once, there was a bouncy castle, face painting, puppet show. I'm not sure that I actually saw a horse that day. And all I remember is being in a face painting queue for about half an hour. And then the same with the bouncy castles and everything else. And I've always said this, when you've got kids, all you want to do is take them out, make them smile. You need a park. You don't even need the animals. You need the park. They want to run, they want to play, they want to be noisy. Face painting, happy days. Bouncy castle, happy days. And those splash park things, happy days. And if you can do it nice and cheaply for parents, it really helps. It helps big time parents. If you've got a cafe with reasonably priced coffee, then it's a winner. And for councils and governments, to throw millions and millions and millions down these old routes, it's not today's world. It's just not. And again, people with leisure horses and pets, please don't use that argument, it's going to affect us, because it's not. It's not. It's like I said, the dog in the slaughterhouse, or the dog is your pet. You stop the dog slaughterhouses, you're not stopping the dog pets. And it is exactly the same with horses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, the horses love that connection with people, and can be treated really well. It's very, they're not an object for profits. That's where the problem comes in. I mean, obviously, all animals can be abused unfortunately by people, because some people are unwell and some people abuse animals. But when you're talking about an industry that is set up around abuse of animals, and it's endorsed,
that's the difference. That's the nail on the head. That's the difference. It's set up for the horse to fail. Pets aren't set up for the majority to fail.
That's right. And like you said, with kids enjoying the industry, taking advantage of people wanting connection in the day out, and we can, and they do that. And if kids want to connect with animals, they can go. Most cities in the world, I would imagine, and definitely all over Australia and the UK, would have sanctuaries and rescues where you can go and you can interact with animals if you don't have the pleasure of having animals living with you, so that you can still go and do that. Like you said, the kids didn't even see horses at the racetrack. I went to the races once before I was working against racing. I've been plenty of times since then, but as a supporter, I went once when I was 18 or 19. I didn't see a horse either. It was so packed, and we were just there to hang out and have drinks and bought into that whole rubbish, and it was boring and I hated it and I never went back. But yeah, I didn't see a horse the whole day. It's ridiculous. So that's what I mean. They really use the social and the fashion to bring these people in. And And there's so many other things we can do to have fun, which is, yeah, what the Nut to the Cup campaign is about. And when you talk about the heat and the stress, every time you read a steward's report throughout the Australian summer, you'll see horses pulling up with heat stress. Always, it's common. You see them heaving when they come off the track. I mean, they're heaving in the winter. In the summer, it's just horrendous, the amount of horses that suffer heat stress, and the amount of horses that, and that heat stress is a really scary thing. It's not just, oh, I feel hot. It can kill a horse. It's very, very scary. And on top of that, they're traveling from track to track, from trainer to track in floats. They're gone a whole day. They don't get to drink as they need and graze as they need. So there's all these other issues associated, obviously, with horse racing, which we would never have time to cover completely. But if you talk about, you know, horses being dehydrated, they need to drink a lot of water, as you would know as a horse carer yourself. They don't have access to water a lot of the day because they're being floated to and from everywhere, which is stressful as well. In the Australian summer, is just outrageous. And then they're forced to gallop at high speeds under stressful situations. So you have a lot of horses suffering dehydration before they've even hit the track for the race day. And then they've got to travel all the way back home to the stable, which can be hours on end, really long tracks. I mean, you've got country tracks, they travel from, sometimes they're traveling 6 hours to a racetrack. I mean, even longer sometimes, to do a race and then home again. I mean, it's just absurd. And we've got, you know, we don't even have any regulations on when a temperature a race needs to be called off.
Well, that's
so
cool.
yeah, it can be over 40 degrees and horses will still be racing. So, you know, and then you've got hard tracks as well because the tracks are dry, which leads to horrific injuries as well because the horses, the tracks can be so hard. At Ascot last year in Perth, we had, I can't remember the exact figure now, but we had a number of fatalities within a few weeks at one track alone. And it's, you know, a lot of that, in our view, was due to that track surface just being so hard because it's so hot.
Sorry, do they not cover the tracks and water them?
No, they often are just racing on really hard, dry tracks. So I'm not sure
great.
how often they are. I'm not sure how often they are watering them, but we know for a fact that Ascot, from people that that we know in Perth, we're saying it's a really, like, it's a hard. They report on the track, you know, the condition of the track, and it was really hard surface, like ridiculously hard. And we wrote to the Minister for Racing. They didn't care. We tried to get the track shut down. They didn't care, and horses just kept dying. You know, and this is the other thing. It's because, like you said, they keep supporting this industry. Last year in Australia alone, we as Australians waged $30 billion on horse racing. 30
Oh
billion.
my God, that's a lot.
30 billion. That's a lot of money. So the government is backing it because of the wagering turnover. It's got nothing. It's just money talks and gambling talks, unfortunately, and that's why our government is in the pocket of the industry, because of the gambling turnover and the profits that the government gets from it. So it's a big, big, big David and Goliath battle, you know. But you've just got to believe in the goodness of people, and the more you educate, the more they'll turn away from it. And like you said, there's alternatives. If you want to gamble, we don't want to promote gambling, but if you want to gamble on something where the participants are willing.
Exactly. I think it's been lovely to talk to you. It's been absolutely lovely to talk to you. We've covered a lot. We're both obviously passionate about horses.
We are, and so much more. You know, like that confinement, and the horses are just, people think they have these wonderful lives, but they're kept in a box all day, 23 hours a day. A horse is kept in a box, and they're let out to go for a gallop, and then they're put back in.
It's absolutely miserable for those horses. It is. I assure people that no horse wants to be in a cage, and it is nothing more than a cage. It's absolutely the most. Everything about it is unnatural. It's an unnatural way to eat, a natural way to drink, a natural way to move. Mm-hmm. They're in the muck. Yes, they get cleaned out, but naturally a horse would move away from where it is to where they poop to graze, and everything else. The whole thing is just, it doesn't work for the horse. And
I guess that's the way that they really get away with selling the industry as well, is they say, look how well looked after they are, when they look at those winning thoroughbreds and those Group 1 racing thoroughbreds that are like that have their feet managed so well with their farriers, and then they have their they're brushed daily and their coats are shiny and all that kind of thing. They're forgetting about a horse doesn't care if they get brushed. I mean, if their
sounds
coat
rather
is
more.
so
It sounds more than like they're talking about the horse like a car, because
yeah, exactly.
all those things are our values. They're not particularly horses' values.
That's right.
At all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. They're happy to be a big furry. Yeah, they want to be able to roll and gallop and frolic and play and interact and be social. And I mean, they're herd animals. They're not meant to be a box on their own. I mean, it's just atrocious.
It is.
And like concentrated diets, which leads to about 90%, studies have shown 90% of horses' stomach suffer from stomach ulcers because they're fed these high protein diets and they aren't able to graze all day, which is what they're supposed to do.
Exactly, and it's not just grass either. They're supposed to be eating a really huge amount of mixed foliage. You know, fields of grass, you know, is probably that's the biggest killer of horses, you know, in the leisure world. It's just, you know, fields of horses, you know, fields of grass, horses go in there, get laminitis because they mix foliage.
Yeah,
you know, the vets are all saying that, you know, that's why most of us have track systems these days where we, you know, and it's huge efforts. I mean, leisure horse owners would literally give their last penny to, you know, for their horse to have a massage or, you know, live to 30 and, you know, have the right rugs and have the right everything. And that is the huge difference between, you know, the two ownerships, I suppose. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Thank you ever so much for joining me today. I hope our readers, you know, readers, that's funny, isn't it, for radio? I hope our listeners have gained a lot of information. Thank you ever so much. One thing I will say is your website details. That is horseracingkills.com, and there is a lot of information on it and things if they want to advocate.
Yeah, loads of information and loads of ways to get involved and to take action, whether that's simply signing petitions, writing letters, or actually donating, volunteering, all sorts of ways to help. And if you're not based in Australia and you need contacts for other groups around the world, we can help do that as well. So speak up. It's all about speaking up, sharing information, and most importantly, not attending or gambling on horse racing.